Welcome back, everybody. And I have to say, I am so honored and grateful to be bringing you this next session. And it is no exaggeration to say that this person and Elaine Aron's work has literally saved my life, number one. And number two is the only reason that I was able to get married. And that's a whole nother topic that we'll save for another time. But many of you who know me know that I did recently get married. And for any of you who are sensitive people out there, I want to strongly encourage you to understand your sensitivity and early on in a relationship, have those conversations. See if they will sit and watch the documentary that we're going to be talking about a little later on in the program with you and really understand that. And we'll do some follow-up conversations about that. I know there is a new documentary being in the works that'll be coming out soon on sensitive people and relationships and love. And it is so incredibly helpful. So for those of you who are sensitive and are familiar with Dr. Aron's work, you know what a treat this is, and it's going to be a great conversation. And we have already shared some links to lectures that Elaine has done, as well as the link to the documentary. And I, again, really want to encourage you to watch that. We're also providing links to Elaine's books, and I happen to have one right next to me that I highly recommend, which is the workbook, the Highly Sensitive Person's Workbook. If you want to go deep into this, this is really a transformational experience. So we'll have all of that to make it simple. We also have some other webinars and things. We don't want to overload you with content, but we want to give you some snippets of conversations and frameworks that will be helpful for you, as well as this incredible research and where the research is going, which I am so excited about. And I know, Elaine, you must be so excited about too, because it has evolved so much since you first started this work. So just a smidge of background, Dr. Elaine Aron is a psychologist. She is most well known for her work with the highly sensitive person trait, and something that she's been doing for decades that now is getting even more attention based on some of the new research looking at the neuroscience behind this and some of the genetic components behind this concept of sensitivity. So when I first heard about this, it was still kind of felt like this weakness or something I had to constantly apologize for. I have to say I do still apologize for some of the components, and I'm working on that, but it felt like a weakness. And this latest research is really helping us to identify the benefits and the strengths of sensitivity. So before I ramble on too much more, Elaine, thank you so much for being here with us. I am just beyond grateful to share all of your work with our community.
Oh, what a wonderful introduction. That's very sweet.
And I know, having watched Elaine for a while now, you are incredibly humble. And I had told her ahead of time I was going to share this because I know so many people have shared that with you, just how relevant this is and really life-changing and oftentimes life-saving because of the challenges around sensitivity if it's not understood and if it's not nourished. And I know in your lecture you talk about the early childhood stress and the impact of that really being a predictor of how the sensitivity either becomes an asset or sometimes really debilitating as it leads to additional things. So we'll talk more about that. It's hard not to go straight into that. What I wanted to start with is how the research is evolving to change our framework. And in your lecture, you mentioned a couple of different studies that looked at different animal species, and they would categorize them as being uptight versus laid back, or being timid versus bold. And all of those labels really make it sound like, well, here are the strong, good ones, and here are these weak, neurotic ones. And that's really starting to change now with Vantage sensitivity and neuroplasticity and all of those things. So how has that maybe impacted the framework or your understanding or even your experience of your own sensitivity?
Well, research moves incredibly slowly. So some of the things on the YouTube that you're recommending, I'll repeat. And there is one big study that makes a big difference in my mind, or reiterates, strongly replicates what we've already found in those 3 other studies, which was to begin with, that we perceive things, we perceive subtleties in our brain, processes information in a more elaborate way or a deeper way. We knew that, but then there was a second study involving being less affected by cultural bias. These are functional magnetic resonance imaging studies. So I'm talking now just about the neuroscience.
Right.
And the third one, so the second one was like when you have Asians and people from a more independent country, there's certain kind of, culture, there's certain kinds of errors that they tend to make, so they have to work harder to avoid making those errors. Mm-hmm. And these are simply perceptual tasks, but it turned out that the sensitive people from both types of cultures did not have to strain as much to see the correct answer on the task. They were not as affected by their cultural bias. So those were kind of perceptual studies. The third one was about the emotional expressions, happy, sad, or neutral, of a loved one or a stranger. And in that study, we found sensitive people were responsive to both, but even more responsive to positive expressions, more responsive than others to all expressions, and to both people, someone close and the stranger, but of course, even more responsive to someone close. So all those differences were very notable in that study. Now, the next study is of, again, positive and negative images, but this time a little bit more looking at the parts of the brain that we already knew were important and looking more closely at them and at areas that are associated with emotion. And here, looking at positive and negative images, we found that highly sensitive people, again, were reacting more to all kinds of images, but much more to positive images than others, which everyone reacts to negative images, but to see the positive images more strongly is quite remarkable. And when they were looking at negative images, they saw those also more, but their reward areas would turn off if they had a bad childhood or not so good childhood, would not turn off when they had a good childhood. So that, and also whatever their childhood, they were able to use the prefrontal cortex to regulate their emotion more than others. And with the positive images too, with a better childhood, they saw images even more positively. So we have both the effect of childhood and we see the strength of the positivity. And so what I think, and we haven't done these studies yet, but I think we're going to find, we did in that one intervention study I talked about where they took young girls, preteens, and gave them a sort of a resilience training to help them avoid depression. It was only the upper 1/3 on the highly sensitive person scale that actually got anything from the intervention at all.
Yeah.
So we think that we're going to find that sensitive people, although they're more affected by a bad childhood, are going to more easily heal from that if they're in a positive environment.
Right.
That means one wants to be very careful about therapists, for instance. You want a very positive relationship going on, not something negative. And there, of course, you need someone who really understands your sensitivity.
And it makes me think of something when I was watching your lectures, I feel like is helpful to clarify. And that is, I find a lot of people think that a bad childhood has to be horrific, it has to be physical abuse or, substance abuse. And I've actually finding more and more in some of the work with Bessel van der Kolk on The Body Keeps the Score and developmental trauma, that a lot of times it's a lack of secure attachments. It may be more rage or anger in the home, and maybe a parent who's disconnected because of their own struggles. And I mean, how often that happens nowadays, that maybe parents aren't just as present as they could be. With a non-sensitive child, it may not matter, but the sensitive child really picks up that non-verbal, non-conscious cues of I think not being safe or not being nurtured. And so I say that because I think a lot of people look at their childhood as I would and say, well, I wasn't abandoned, but there was some anger and there were some other things happening that made me not feel safe that then led to a more negativity bias, and that's
Sensitive,
what they just be. Yeah.
sensitive kids are more sensitive to their environments, of course. But for instance, in one study, they had children being taken care of for a half hour before they went into this experiment by someone who ignored them versus someone who paid attention to them. That's not a very big difference.
Right.
And when they, and in another study, they just looked at secure and insecure attachment. When they went into this very overstimulating environment, the children who had been secure attachment or with an attentive caretaker did not have, they all had the initial adrenaline response of, oh, what is this? But then the cortisol response that they were under stress did not occur if they had a better situation. In our studies, we do not have people with very bad childhoods. I doubt we have almost anyone in these studies that's been abused or neglected in a serious way.
Yeah.
Insecure attachments across the culture are probably around 40%. So it's not hard to get people who had what they would have to call not such a good family life. In fact, most of what we use are parental bonding questionnaires. It's just sort of how close you are to your parent. So it's much more just what you're describing.
Well, and I'm thinking if there's that depth of emotional processing as well, that sensitive kids really want a strong emotional bond with their parents, maybe even more. I'm like you, I know we have to get the research to show it, but then the intuition of the sensitive person starts connecting these dots and saying, well, that makes sense if this, so may even feel more affected because they're longing for even a stronger connection. Going back to kind of that positive is reinforced as well as the negative.
Yes, I think probably people vary in their need for strong connection throughout their lives. And so I think it may work more that a sensitive child picks up on very subtle signs of positive. In other words, maybe the parent's very busy, but just there's a glance that's a smile or a glance that's a frown or a response to something the child says versus no response that would be picked up on perhaps in a very subtle way with busy parents, and still there would be the sense of a positive childhood. But I agree that a really positive childhood would be even better, and lots of people are learning more about parenting in that way, and we find sensitive children also more affected by interventions with parents to teach them how to supply a secure attachment, which many parents are just not aware of how much their behavior affects that, especially in a young child.
Yeah.
So I think
I have to mention that you are teaching a retreat that I'm really hoping to go to, and I don't know how often this happens, but you do some workshops on highly sensitive children and those
this
relationships.
is actually the first one.
The first
I'm doing it with Elaine Friend and Candy Crawford, who are both probably more skilled in working with sensitive children than I am. It's not my specialty. So I'm very excited about doing that. We're going to do that both at 1440 University in Santa Cruz and then at Kripalu in the fall. So I think it brings up a good point, which is that one of the difficult childhoods with very good parents are parents who don't understand their child's sensitivity. So that's a whole source of a, quote, bad childhood that really isn't unfair because the parents, if they don't know about sensitivity, may be excellent parents, but there's not parenting right for this particular temperament.
Right. And that's the number one question I get now at my speaking engagements is parents will come talk to me about their kids who are anxious. And I always go straight to, are they sensitive? And for me, I can usually tell quickly by asking about bright lights, loud noises, crowds. And the parent always says, yes. Are they moved by the arts? There's kind of some quick questions you can ask. And literally 100% of the time, there's a sensitivity component that's leading, and so they're diagnosing as anxiety. I think in the past we might have said shyness, but now it's showing up as anxiety, and they do want to learn. So I'm really grateful that there's going to be more teaching and training on that. And one other little nugget I have to pull out of what you said is no response. It reminds me of Stephen Porges's work, who's also on our program in affect, and the fact that like a parent with no emotional connection is terrifying to kids.
Yes, that's right. I've seen those videos.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So one might say, as Jay Belsky does, that we're very plastic in a sense. There's a plasticity, a neuroplasticity, so that in a way we're the easiest to get something good out of by just doing it right in even a slightly better way. So that's one of the things I point out too, is that the public, when the general population of not sensitive people, when they think of a sensitive person, they think of someone who's overly sensitive, who's sensitive to criticism, who's, you know, always complaining about the lights or the noise or being too tired or whatever. And those people tended to have a more difficult childhood, because I always say that self-care and sort of self-regulation is taught in childhood, and if you don't have it, then you don't take care of yourself as an adult or have high enough self-esteem to do what you need, and you kind of disappear if you're well adapted. You don't have to tell people all the time that you're highly sensitive. I agree, it's a good thing to do at the start of a relationship, and the issue is actually in the first third of the movie. We already have the script of the movie, and that's definitely an important part, is how do you tell and when do you tell someone that you're highly sensitive. So overall, what we have is a very positive trait, but it is very affected by the environment. Yeah. So if somebody wants to avoid years of psychotherapy, they certainly, the parenting in the early life can certainly be a big factor.
Yeah. So we've got two ways of thinking about this. One is for those who maybe have children who are sensitive and watching this. We want to strongly encourage you to understand. And is your book about kids out yet, or is that still?
The Highly Sensitive Child has been published.
Okay, good.
Out. That's been out since, I think, 2006. So it's
right. So that's a good resource that's out there. And then for those who maybe did have a tough childhood or stressful, and that's kind of the way I like thinking about it. It's a stressful childhood, however that's defined, knowing that our perception is really everything in that experience. It's not too late. And there's all of these great ways of understanding your sensitivity. And I think the strengths, that's been a real aha for me, especially learning that so many other people who are healthcare practitioners, counselors, therapists, transformational leaders, meditation teachers have sensitivity. It's what draws us into this field. And when we know that there's a strength to it, it's wonderful. And we have to be really careful not to exhaust ourselves, because we get so passionate now about saving the world that we're not taking care of our own vehicle. So this is the thing I wanted to talk to you most about, because I still struggle with this, and I know many people do. What have you found in your experience of navigating life and doing research and wanting to put good content out to the world? How do you navigate your own kind of self-care and boundaries?
I just wanted to say one thing about highly sensitive therapists, and that in July at the University of Santa Cruz, there will be a sort of 4-day retreat conference.
Wonderful.
For sensitive therapists, just so you know about that. I think I'm not sure, well, it'll be on my website, hsperson.com.
Yeah, we will share that as well, absolutely.
So, well, one of the things I say is that the older you get, usually the wiser you get about your sensitivity. You realize, you just realize when you don't take care of yourself, it costs a lot. And when you do, things go smoothly. And I like to think that sensitive people can do less and accomplish more. That's an old saying from my spiritual teacher, that the benefit of meditation is that even though you're spending time out of your day doing that, you're actually accomplishing more. And that's really my life experience. Yeah. So self-care is just at the top of my list. I don't always succeed at it. I still make mistakes because as you get older in a field where you're making discoveries, the world wants more of you, and just when you might like to cut down, so I have to pick and choose what I'm going to do. And some people find it extraordinary, but my husband and I, and he's pretty well known for his research on love too, and his 36 questions that went viral a few years ago. We both meditate about an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening, plus taking off a week every month or 2 months to just do extra meditation and to rest. That sounds extraordinary to some people, but fortunately, we love to meditate. So we do a form of meditation that's very, very effortless and takes you right to deep silence, and you're attracted to it and you enjoy it. And even if you're not there, you're cleaning out stress and feeling better and better. So, and I have found that actually I took 6 months off about a year and a half ago. We took 6 months off.
I remember that was during our summit. Right before it. I was so bummed not to have you, but so grateful we have you now.
And there too, we were traveling some, but only to very beautiful places in the country. And again, we took off 1 week a month. And by the end of that, I had a real breakthrough in my meditation and in my life, which has made a big difference to me. Yeah. And so I like to think that all those years of meditation, although it was useful day by day and month by month, it also has a payoff down the road. Yes. And I think I might have actually had that payoff earlier if I had known just a little bit more how to look for it, yeah, and how to give birth to it, you might say. At any rate, I do experience for myself now a tremendous equanimity where things just don't worry me that much. I care a lot, and I do what I can, but I don't worry. And it's interesting to think about sensitive children, because Elaine, friend who works with sensitive children, has the same experience, that parents come with an anxious child and they almost always turn out to be highly sensitive. Yeah. And of course, there are anxious children who are not highly sensitive, and some child therapists are complaining that all anxious children are being called highly sensitive when they really need treatment for anxiety. And in my opinion, it doesn't make too much difference, the diagnosis, in the short run, because you want to do something about the anxiety. Although what you do about it is different with sensitive children, but I won't go into that too much. But we do come into the world with what you might call thin boundaries. So, and the world is very startling to children, and it's still startling to sensitive people as adults, some of the things that happen. So we do need a way to cope with that anxiety. And I think meditation is one of the very best ways, because another secret I found that I think works for everybody all the time, and it all comes down to one thing: take a step back. Step back is what's happening today, what's going to be happening tomorrow. Marie Rainier Rilke in one of the poems said, "No feeling is final." So whatever you're feeling today, you probably won't be feeling tomorrow, or certainly a month from now, or certainly a year from now. Circumstances change. All kinds of things change as you step back and look at it from a bigger perspective, or step back and think about it either in time or space. You know, go stand on another planet and look at our planet and think about what's going on from that position, you know, not your personal life, but all life, and what might be going on that you can't perceive because you can't take a step back far enough. So that's kind of my summation of what I think you get from meditation, but you can also do for yourself. I think overall, it's frustrating to people if I say, "Oh, you must have more equanimity," because that sounds like an attitude or a mood, whereas this is more of a permanent state, and it's accessible, but it takes time to access that. But nevertheless, that stepping back, anybody can do.
Yeah. Well, you brought up so many great points, and it was actually something I connected with again as I was listening to one of your lectures, was downtime and how, as sensitive people, downtime may be different. And this is just a personal example I'd love to share, because especially for people in relationships, I could never quite explain that for me, if I want to just go run an errand to the post office, I really want to go by myself. I want that quiet downtime.
Yes.
And my partner or friend or family member always thinks everything's social. So, well, I'll go with you. Well, and I feel rude saying, it's not that I don't want to talk to you, but I need that literally down time. And you mentioned something, number one, it's not necessarily introversion, extroversion, because we know that's a little bit different, but that because we're processing so much so deeply, I picture almost just that it just needs to settle. There's that neurological or physiological settling that I can feel in my body when I'm agitated. So instead of saying I'm anxious, a lot of what I'll communicate now is just, I just need that downtime because I'm overstimulated. One of the key tenets of the sensitive.
Right.
And
in
being
fact,
able to use words and language that doesn't feel like I'm saying it's not anti-you, it's pro me getting to the state where I can now be with you and really make that time more precious for us.
Well, interestingly, I think practically the second theme in the movie on relationships is about a sensitive versus non-sensitive new couple in which they have a battle about, she wants to go home after a very big day and he wants to show her off at the local bar with his buddies, and she does not want to do that. And she's very firm, because in the film there's a therapist who tells her, you better be firm about this, and she is firm, and it, he gets it eventually. Downtime is very important, and I always say that you have to teach your partner, especially a non-sensitive partner, or I don't like to use that word non-sensitive, but someone who doesn't have that trait, who could feel abandoned and disappointed too. And you just have to reassure them that you truly love them, but that this is going to make you a happier person, an easier person to get along with if you have that downtime. And, that's been a lesson that my husband has absorbed over the years, with help from other people, just reminding him that this isn't anything personal. Because it is disappointing if someone really likes to be with you, but then that's not a bad thing for them to deal with either to find other interests, or to find that solitude is pretty good for them too.
It's so funny. I've had brain scans on several occasions, and at one point with my now husband, we went to a session together to kind of help him understand what was going on. And the therapist wasn't calling it highly sensitive, but essentially that's what was going on. And the funny thing is, it's someone I've become friends with now, and he turned to my now husband and said, "You lucky fella." And it was so interesting, because I think for both of us, it kind of, because it was like, but I'm going through all of these challenges and problems, and he's going, "You're lucky, because when she's there, she is fully there, very committed, deeply passionate," so that, again, that other side, that really is so beautiful. And having someone who can see that and appreciate it, is willing to say, take all the time you need, because when you're here, it's going to be so great. So I think with the meditation and downtime, so critical, setting boundaries like you have, I think that's so helpful to understand. And when you're getting more done, because you are processing so quickly and so deeply, that time is not a waste of time. It's helping you to be productive. And then the last little question I had for you on that is, my assumption would be that there may be a higher likelihood that we would also be sensitive potentially to certain foods, sugar, caffeine, we know, but also movement, being physically active, spending time in nature, and sleep. And so you've touched on that before, how important sleep is, and maybe even sleeping a little bit later than other people might. So just wanted to see if you wanted to touch on that at all, kind of other self-care components that have to do with our physical body.
I think with diet, I've never spoken strongly about diet, because I think people need to figure that out for themselves, and that people vary a lot. I remember the only time I ever saw two HSPs at a seminar I was giving get pretty angry at each other was when one said that she couldn't live without eating meat, just after someone else had said she couldn't imagine anyone eating the flesh of an animal.
So you just decided to stay out of that nutrition conversation. Can get very political and very passionate.
Yeah. And in general, I think people have a food complex, just like a mother complex or a father complex or authority complex, but it differs from person to person. When we tangle around it, there can be issues. Yeah. But downtime, there's not much to discuss, and time in nature too. Someone was saying to me, "Oh, do you think highly sensitive need time in nature?" And I say, absolutely, as much as possible. Well, no, all the time, because I live in California. The only exercise I do is outdoors, because it just is what I need, and it's good for your body too, to walk on an uneven surface, not a treadmill. Mm-hmm. But I realize that some people need to exercise indoors because of the weather. And I say that we need water. We need to drink lots of water. We need to hear water, see water, be in water, because our body is mostly water. As far as sleep, I think people should experiment with what I was told by my spiritual teacher, that most of our stimulation comes in through our eyes. Mm-hmm. If you stay in bed with your eyes closed and perhaps find something that you can think about. I used to tell myself horse stories. I'd make up stories about racehorses or something like that. And of course they would be, come from behind types of horses, and maybe no one valued, and then they discover that they were really fantastic horses. So I would make up those stories. Or you have to get your mind off of your worries. Right. And you have to have a place to go. But staying in bed with your eyes closed for 8 hours, not worrying about whether you're going to sleep or not, I think can be an effective alternative to the advice that people are given. Well, if you can't sleep, get up, write down your worries, or read until you get sleepy. These different ideas, which people should try. But this is an alternative that maybe takes away that worry that, oh, I'm not going to sleep and I'm going to have a terrible day tomorrow. And I also find that even if I haven't gotten much sleep in the morning, when I meditate, and maybe that meditation is drowsy even, which is fine, that I don't feel tired the rest of the day. Yeah. And the evening I may fall asleep in meditation, which is fine, but it hasn't burdened me all day. Yeah. So, and then I just wanted to say something else about anxiety and downtime, which is that it's easy to mistake over arousal and anxiety. Yeah. They have almost the same sensation. In fact, a study I really loved, done by Phil Zimbardo, who loved to study shyness, was he had shy and non-shy women have a conversation with a handsome, guy who Phil Zimbardo had trained to do this. And either in a noisy place, well, in both cases in a noisy place, but in one case, the shy women were told that they could feel over-aroused, like their hands get sweatier, their stuff, because that's the effect of this loud sound that you're hearing. And the others didn't get that instruction or that information. So the end result was the shy women who attributed their anxiety to over-arousal were not shy at all. They were friendly and had a great time, and the guy couldn't tell the shy from the unshy women in that condition of the experiment. And these supposedly shy women in that, where they attributed to over-arousal, were eager to come back and do it again. The other women, no, and they were terribly shy through the whole thing. So some of the problems with shyness, I think, happen, well, in anxiety. I tell the story of when my son and my nephew, on separate occasions, I was there when they started preschool. In both cases, they stood in the back of the room and they watched. And then the teacher came up and said, "What's the matter? Are you shy? Are you afraid?" And immediately that understanding of what was going on was put onto them. Yeah. And so then when you think you're anxious or shy, as an adult or a child, you're afraid others will notice. When you're over-aroused, you can't think of anything to say. You can think of it lying in bed, what you should have said, but you can't think of it in the moment when you're meeting someone new necessarily. So I call it the slide into shy, and I think that happens to children too, the slide into anxiety, because shyness is just the fear of social judgment. Yeah. So we fear social judgment. It's one of the worst things to fear, because what we all really fear is shame. which is that there's something wrong with our core self. Sensitive people so often, as you say, changes their life to realize there's nothing wrong with their core self. When they can hold their head up with pride in any situation and attribute any issues they're having to their sensitivity, and that it has this wonderful side to it as well. I say we make better second impressions than first impressions. And if we spend time and can get into a deep conversation, people are very impressed with us. But most social situations don't encourage deep conversation.
And I love that you shared at one point, I know this was helpful for me, and my friend Ariel Ford as well does a lot with relationships, and we were laughing about the fact that we get bored with small talk. So we get bored in relationships a lot because we want to be in that deep, we want downtime to be quiet, and we want to be in that deeper space. So it's almost like an oscillation of intensity that we want to really go there, and then we need to kind of back off for a while. So the surfacey stuff without judgment just doesn't excite us or interest us.
Yes. My husband wanted me to go with him to a conference on relationships. He said, "What would you like to study? You'll have something to present." I just rolled my eyes and I said, "How about boredom in relationships?"
I'd love to do that.
And he sort of thought, "Are you trying to tell me something?" So we made a study and we looked at boredom in terms of, did you wish that you were going and doing more exciting things, or do you wish that there was deeper conversations? Sensitive people were definitely more bored. It was about not having deeper conversations. And what I loved was that they did not count their relationships as less satisfying, even if they were bored, because I think we get it.
Yeah.
We know, okay, if this person's not as sensitive, we eventually just learn to live with that.
Yeah.
Value them because we can deeply process and see all the good things about the person too.
Yeah. Well, that just makes me want to spin in so many directions, of course. And I'm so grateful because we've spent more time, and I'm so thankful I could talk to you all day. I want to share with those of you who are watching just a couple of cool things that I haven't told Elaine yet that we're really excited about. With my work, we've got a new group forming, actually, the Academy for Brain Health and Performance, and it's got a lot of faculty involved with Harvard. They're going to be overseeing a lot of our research analysis. And I'm happy to say that I am plowing gently but still forcefully HSP research into everything that we're doing, looking at brain health and performance. So really excited about that, including a stress assessment that's looking at stress and including sensitivity as a factor so that we can help educate people on what that means and how to navigate it. And also, just for those of you who may have this experience, I'm always a little surprised to find this out, looking at the correlation with sensitivity and vasovagal syndrome, which I know I had emailed you about, Elaine, as well as Dr. Porges, because of personal experiences, but also I'm surprised how many people have this kind of undiagnosed condition that actually causes us to faint from being overstimulated. And for a long time, I was told it wasn't happening, which is really weird when something's happening, even at the doctor's office, and they're saying it's not happening.
Right.
But I think that there's a connection there that will be really helpful to explore. So anyone who's watching who's had that experience or knows someone, we are looking for people to have some discussions and conversations with. So I'll post the link to get involved with that research as well. And also, I think it's important for us as HSPs to come together and share our stories. And so we'll be looking to host some additional retreats for sensitive people where it's kind of nice to be with other HSPs and know that we're okay setting boundaries and actually practice those together and learn how to take those home to our real world experiences. So just so much more to do, and it's all super exciting, and we'll keep you in the loop, Dr. Aron, because we're so grateful for your contributions. And any kind of last thoughts that you want to share with the group, or anything that we've mentioned your workshop that you've got coming up, as well as the one for therapists, which sounds amazing. I may try to get to that one as well. Anything else that you're looking forward to that's coming up for you?
Well, I was invited to do a Sounds True, if you know what that is, a Sounds True 8-hour course, and I'm really looking forward to that. That's the kind of juicy things that I'm taking on and I just trained 15 people to speak and do interviews and write about sensitivity. They already were, but I wanted them to really understand the research.
Great.
And just one other thing, you will often find, in your case, you're not going to, but often find there are many studies that find sensitive people are more affected by stress.
Yeah.
Doggone it, I always say, you're not studying sensitive people who understand their sensitivity.
That's right.
Once you understand your sensitivity, you can manage it much better. But if you don't understand it, then you're trying to behave like the other 80%. So I encourage people to, as you say, to really understand their trait, to reframe their life and their childhood about those things that seemed like mistakes or decisions that, other people didn't approve of, that were there because of their sensitivity. To heal from past troubles and traumas, and to have faith that you can really do that.
Yeah.
Not to live like the other 80%, that you have to, Jacqueline Strickland, who does HSP gatherings, talks about being on the freeway and taking your exit and getting off of that crowded freeway and doing it your way.
That's right.
Finally, I say, yes, go somewhere where you will be just in a group of other highly sensitive people. It feels amazing. I say sometimes it feels like I'm walking into church because it's so quiet and they're so respectful. Not 100%, we're hardly perfect, but we do have that different style of operating the nervous system, and you can feel it. So yes, I encourage people to go to anything like that.
Wonderful. Well, I will be working on that. I will let you know, because that's the type of thing we're going to look at in our research, is some pre and post assessments of stress and reactivity and negativity bias when we have people that understand the framework and do a little bit of training around meditation and things like that. So it'd be nice.
Well, if you can fit in a control group.
We will, yes.
Yeah, let me know about that research and we might be able to help, or at any rate, if it's going to be published. I don't talk about research that's not published, but once it's published, that would be great.
Yep. We will support that and keep it going. And thank you again so much for your work. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll have all those resources for you, and we will be back with you again soon. Thank you.